Thank you very much, Minnie. Thank you, everybody who braved the rain that I'm actually just used to. And it's a super honor to be here today, and especially slightly stressful to follow Dorit, who I always come to learn from, but something a little bit different. And I'm going to take you back to thinking about what is the quest to dominate AI and consequently quantum and other technologies, redefining what it means to be a cyber superpower. And actually just a step back, because a lot of technologists in the room, a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of thinking about building on this stack and kind of forgetting what's going on underneath. So I'm going to give you a little snapshot of what's going on that you've heard already, but really where I really focuses on this intersection between, I've been teaching my baby called From Cyber Warfare to Robots, a Future Conflict in the Digital Age since 2016 now, which seems like a really long time, and really focusing on this intersection between disruptive tech, deep tech, and its impact on the world order. And very similar to what Dorit just said, we tend to, particularly in cyber, operate in a world of patching, right? We're working on what's come behind us, right? We're always running, sort of figuring out what's what, which leads us to a space sort of psychologically as we don't see the world actually as it is, but as we are, as what we're doing in any given moment. So this is a little bit of a step of what is actually going on in the world and how is it affecting what it means to be a cyber superpower or an AI superpower. Now, lots of these things you've seen, you have experienced, people who are local definitely experience what we call the VUCA world. It's volatile, it's unpredictable, it's complex, it's ambiguous. And that's because it happens along all these, we've got rapid state of adoption, we've got massive inclusion of IoT devices, still don't understand why anyone needs a Wi-Fi enabled blender, that's like beyond me. And we also have a very angry bear, right? And that's a sort of right. So you've had your missile attacks. If you look at what's been going on in Russia, Ukraine, it's still, and particularly in the last few days, it's manic. And an angry bear in the system is never something you really want. Now, one thing we know, take it back to International Relations 101 or International Security 101, if any of you haven't ever studied it. When the environment becomes uncertain, as a general rule, two things happen. Relative capabilities have overriding importance in the system. Anyone ever played a prisoner's dilemma game? Iterated prisoner's dilemma game? A couple of people, right? Where you get into that point that it actually doesn't matter. You just want to have that much more than someone. And therefore, you're in a phase of just trying to acquire as much power as possible. And in our maxim, in our world, when it's uncertainty, the rule generally goes, it's better to be Godzilla than to be Bambi. Now, I'm going to introduce something else to you in a minute, because I actually think it's better to be a Hydra when we come from the state. I think Hydra trumps Godzilla and Bambi. Now, power, when we were seeking absolute power from the traditional perspective, geopolitics was all about, could you control the sea? Could you command the sea? It was about the stopping power of water. You could only command as far as you could get. And then once you had boats, you could get further. Once you got planes, you get further, right? But today, we have a lot more seas to try and control if you're a state. So we've got the world's most valuable resource, oil. We've got compute potentially as a currency to fuel our system. We've got, the rise of Gen AI. I'm always resentful that Putin said it was a he who controls AI will control the world as opposed to a she who controls AI. Because we have some of the she's out here working to control the AI, please. But there are an infinite increasing amount. So as we talk about this expanding surface as far as states and geopolitics and actors in the system, there is a massive amount more to control. And that is expanding every single day. And the one thing I do want to think that gets often forgotten in this conversation, 2.2 billion people are still not connected to the internet, right? So we're still operating on an assumption of what we know. That means what percentage of that 2.2 billion are going to become very smart hackers, AI enabled very quickly. They're going to step into the generation of autonomous hacking straight away. Now, we think about the system as we know it. Think about a system with another 2.2 billion people connected into it with how many devices is everyone carrying with them today? 3, 4, 5, right? And just like, yeah, that is not a pretty picture to begin to protect. So we're incorporating everything into our daily lives. A massive optimist, like it's going to be life changing, it's going to be positive, it's going to can improve our life. But we have to look at what that scale is. And that is the scale that also states are seeking to control. And we know this fabric is fragile. Let's forget hackers and malicious actors. It's amazing the fact the system operates at all. We have like acts of God, if when the subsea cable outage happened in West Africa, that was an underwater landslide that took out the cable connectivity on the West Coast. Now, the impact of that is that the stock exchange in Ghana that day had to stay open for an extra hour to make up for lost trading. So these things have absolute meaningful impact on our daily lives. Lovely solar storms in 2024. You could see suddenly in England, randomly in the middle of May, you could see the aurora borealis. Everyone went in the gardens. It was beautiful. In the US, John Deere tractors could not operate that day. John Deere had to issue a warning that because the young whippersnapper farmers can't drive a tractor in a straight line without GPS anymore, that the tractors would not be operating that day. Corn prices were affected. So the stack on which we're building is already incredibly fragile. And then, did anyone play with Ghibli when it came out? Anyone? When it came out, the sort of OpenAI released it. So many people went on, instantly their servers started melting. Literally, they had to suddenly tokenize how many people could use it. Their servers started melting. And then we saw what happened in Spain, Portugal, when it was, and that wasn't even cyber attack. Now, within the system, we've got our traditional competition. Even yesterday, we saw that China, the US said China could have H200 trips if the US took a 25% cut of the levy of that. I don't know whether you've been following this, but China has now banned Japanese singers because they didn't like what the Japanese pop stars were being taken off the stage in China because didn't like what the Japanese Prime Minister said about Taiwan. We've had the rollback of the nuclear test ban treaty that came after Trump's visit to East Asia. And of course, we're seeing ships being boarded off the coast of Venezuela. So all the traditional forms of competition, but they're happening in untraditional places. So we're seeing it in our subsea cable networks, like particularly if we've looked at the Baltics, and we've seen how there just sort of seems to be a number of ships of like floating anchors that sort of take out subsea cables at inopportune moments. But if anyone watched China's military display when they did it a few months ago, the sort of big like missiles, everything, one that they didn't sort of advertise was their new diamond-plated cable cutter. A diamond-plated cable cutter that can take out 95% of the world's cable architecture. So what we're seeking, what it means to be a cyberpower, we begin to think about, well, is that always going to be there for us? Whatever we're building, do we have this in place? And then it's going to the least governed place, literally in the universe, is we're seeing massive expansion into space. Even yesterday, did anyone see this on X yesterday? The message from StarCloud, the first data AI processing in space with the message. It was the lovely Gemma, it's called. And opened with a statement, greeting Earthlings from StarCloud, the Google project. We already know that in order to try and process data in space, the new StarCloud project is aiming to capture sunlight or sunlight in space in order to energize data processing in space. Massive problems because they're going to be transmitting information by a laser, which beyond that could be an anti-satellite weapon, which is a whole nother lecture, that we're getting increasing attacks on our space infrastructure that we're going to be reliant upon. And China's up there too, also out there in your AI data race. And of course, we're going to the depths of the Earth as well, because whether it's, well, with quantum, actually, it's up in space. With helium, we need to be able, we're going to have the helium race in order to cool quantum computers. But from the depth of the Earth, we're seeing this in all the diplomacy and the critical minerals deals that have been coming out from US visits to East Asia, to potentially an end to the conflict in the Congo with an agreement, Rwanda and the Congo, with the US as a guarantor in return for access to minerals. Of course, there's a lovely Greenland, I mean, the US, which is, besides China that has it naturally, the US imports 100% of 11 of its critical minerals. So when we think about how this ecosystem can develop, it's like, what do we have to build it on? And of course, across this, we have states impacting our peace of mind. We've had this week an influence summit. We've seen where it impacts the data that's stolen with the deep fakes. And now, what's in our electric buses across the place. And new horizons, new explosions on the horizons, from working BCIs to building small modular reactors to the quantum map. What's that going to be? And states that aren't the US and China are facing competition as to who to align with. There's two different visions of where the picture is going to go. And we're not even keeping our eye on this. So I would just say last week, Namibia opened their first satellite receiving station built on Chinese technology. So we are losing a battleground diplomatically in our tech stack as to the nations that we need within our supply chain. Because and this has been talked about, just on the cyber level, but there's a new axis of cooperation emerging. BRICS countries are, like the BRICS group is growing faster than any other group. And, if we go to Venezuela, Iran opened a fiber optic manufacturing facility in Venezuela, which you begin to explain what's going on with the obsession with Venezuela right now as to where these actors are working together. And we know they work together right now better than the Western alliances. We're all fragmenting and they're coalescing across the board. And of course, we've got a new lot of power brokers. Apparently, they're even building their own cities, according to the Financial Times this week, where the King of Denmark referred to Jensen Huang as a real king on the stage. Jensen Huang himself, not NVIDIA, was declared by the US a strategic asset, a human being. I don't know what that means. It means that you get a castle or something. But we know that now senior leaders don't move without their entourage, who are their new diplomats, as part of what they're seeking to get. And diplomacy is being reshaped. And there's things we're still forgetting. There's a massive divide that we need to be addressing if we want secure and trusted supply chains within our cyberpower. And there's huge things in competition for our fundamental systems, right? SIP, the Chinese alternative to SWIFT, which Africa hates for the most part. You see some people in the audience. It's providing meaningful alternatives. And of course, we've got the vision of everything everywhere all at once. So what do we do? And probably I've got 2 minutes to take this through. We hear a lot about resilience. How do we make our countries resilient to this? How do we make our companies resilient to this? I've got a level of concept called anti-fragility that was actually the counterpart. If you read the book Black Swan, Nissan Time also put out the concept of anti-fragility. Anti-fragility is different from resilience. Anti-fragility allows you to thrive through challenge. Very much like the body has 2 ears, 2 kidneys, 2 eyes. So when something goes wrong, you've got something going on. Can you thrive through the shock? Can you embrace that randomness? Are you prepared as a country? And I can tell you for sure the UK isn't. Can you embrace that randomness? Can you value redundancy? Redundancy is not economically logical, right? To build something that you don't use half the time is not always logical, but it's going to be necessary, particularly when you're, as an entrepreneur, when you're building things. It's not what you think about, what's behind you, but you have to think about what you need to move forward. Is it going to be decentralized? What is strategic interdependence in this point? So what is the interdependence in your supply chain? Also, where can you be a really important part of that supply chain? The greatest skill in this, MacGyvering, right? Can you, because when that hits the fan, are you able to work with what you've got to move forward? And just with a little bit of optimism, that's the old map of the 16th century of that to 15th century drawing of what the center of the world looked like. I actually believe that if you look at the trajectory, I do geopolitical advisory and tech and for signals for living, I think we're on the potential of a rising Middle East. To counter these massive rivalry powers, I think there's a huge space for a trusted rising Middle East as part of the technological supply chain and where you become an enabler in that picture. So that's my moment of how to be place yourself within the supporting others' anti-fragility within the future of tech and AI. And because of those that can access this, those will be the next generation superpowers, whether it's for AI, whether it's for quantum, whether it's for satellite internet. Let's start out 6G. It's going to be satellite internet that's coming. And we all have to think about what that world is. So what I would say, the fact that we think we understand the past tends to give us overconfidence so we can predict our future. So let's really stop, think about it, and build forward, not backwards. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to be here.